Let's sing together a few songs this evening. Have faith in God, even when your pathway is lonely. Have faith in God when your pathway is lonely. He sees and knows all the way you have trod. Never alone are the least of his children. Have faith in God, have faith in is a Fanny Crosby. It's not one of her most popular ones, but I think it's a great hymn. Either one of these you prefer to play?
The first one, probably.
Okay, let's do Ancient Words. Holy words long preserved for our walk in this world, they resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart words of life, words of hope, give us strength, help us cope in this world where we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Holy words of our faith, handed down to this age, came to us through sacrifice. Oh, heed the faithful words of Christ. Holy words long preserved for our walk in this world, they resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Thank you very much.
Find Nehemiah. It'll be right after Ezra if you still have your bookmark there from last week. But it's with the wisdom books. It's not with the prophets. So don't think Jeremiah. Think after Chronicles and before Psalms. All right, let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your presence with us and for your boundaryless love for us. By the aid of your Spirit, may we look through this passage now and may we understand you, your work in our world, and ourselves rightly because of it. Lord, we confess our great need of you to come and reshape us, and I confess my great need of you to reshape me. Father, help us to hear your voice and have the courage to follow. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, everybody make it okay? All right, now we're recapping. Well, first off, it's important to say, to Hebrews, Ezra and Nehemiah are one book. It's just called Ezra. I haven't found an answer yet to who decided they needed to be split for Christians, but they're together for Jews. But so really, while it may feel like we started a new book, we've really just continued on the path set out by the Hebrew book Ezra. At this point, though, the character of Nehemiah takes over. However, the character of Ezra appears in his most full form inside what is now known as Nehemiah. So Ezra is not done. We're just shifting the focus to Nehemiah for a few moments. Okay, so in the recap, though, Ezra came back, and then we started, well, actually, let's be frank about it. The book of Ezra took us back. We brought back people under the edict of King Cyrus. We started to rebuild the temple. We put a foundation in, we offered sacrifices, and then the work stopped because of trouble. Then about 2 weeks ago, the prophet Haggai came to them, and he said, guys, we got to get going. Let's build the temple. We're working on the interior sheetrock of our own house when God's house is in shambles. And so they started again, and they built the temple. And then last week, Ezra showed up for the first time. He came from Babylon. And we dealt with that really sticky situation. If you enjoyed the Super Bowl instead of last week's sermon, it was probably a good week to do so. Because we talked about the really sticky situation of the intermarried folks in Jerusalem and how to practically deal with that. So, when we just turn the page over, we get to Nehemiah. Now, we're going to see a few things. It has been 13 years since Ezra came over. Ezra is still here. As I said, he's going to appear in the book. He's still around. And we're going to see a king today. It's King Artaxerxes the First, which is 2 kings after Esther. Okay? We had Xerxes, and then we have Darius the Second, and then we have Artaxerxes. Okay? So, 2 kings after Esther. The story of Esther. All right, so this puts this story roughly a century from King Cyrus's first edict that they could come home and rebuild the temple. All right? Now, we're going to read this in 3 sections because we're going to place it out that way. I'm calling this, I'm sure I'm not the first person, but it's going to help us set up what we're expecting. The 2 prayers of Nehemiah, okay? 2 very different prayers take place. One will remind us of last week, and one will take us to a new place. So let's just read Nehemiah 1 through 4. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. And I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And we'll pause there. We'll pick that right up in a second. So, when we're looking at this, I just want you to set this up. In the month of Kislev, Kislev straddles part of November and part of December, okay? So in part of November or somewhere in the end of November, beginning of December, Nehemiah is going to receive some news from his brothers, or from a brother and his brother's friends. What news does Nehemiah receive? What do they tell him? Walls are not there. The gates have been burned. And he uses a couple adjectives. The people there, how are the people doing? And great trouble and disgrace. Okay, now we don't know something. There's something we don't know. Whether this is just describing the situation of Jerusalem from the time of Nebuchadnezzar till today, or but because of the fact that this seems to shock Nehemiah. we wonder if there has been further conflict, right? Nehemiah should not be shocked at this story unless the story reveals new information to him. But in this case, he seems genuinely shocked, right? So we wonder if there was escalated problems that resulted in burning and further destruction of the walls, maybe between the adversaries and the remnant led by Ezra. We're not sure. But he apparently did not know how bad things were back in Judah. Susa is one of the most, where he is one of the most important cities in the ancient Persian Empire. It's not that far from Babylon itself. It was kind of like the new Babylon with the Persians' stamp on it. Now, the expression that they use here indicates the community was in a weak and reduced state. It is only a group of survivors. Okay, so we're talking 13 years after Ezra's mission. This is how they would describe it. The people there are in a lot of trouble. The people there are disgraced. The walls are completely down, and the gates are ruined, right? The gates would have been wooden, and they've been burned. So even if the wall was up, the gates are missing, right? So it's a pretty sad state of affairs, okay? Now, how does Nehemiah react to this news? He wept for days. If you were with us last week, we looked at an amazing prayer of Ezra. Ezra, in that chapter that we read, when he learned what was happening with the intermarrying and really just to be clear, the real issue with the intermarrying last week was that they were marrying people, let's just say women, of different faiths, and they were accommodating their faiths. They were doing the thing that angered God the most over the centuries. The problem wasn't that they were marrying people from a different ethnicity. The problem was that they were marrying people from a different religion, and those people were not being accommodated. That was the first problem, the first complaint. And what we saw is that Ezra absolutely went into mourning. I don't remember who was here and who wasn't, but Ezra sat right down where he heard the news. He was in the temple when he heard the news, and he sat right down on the floor. And he tore his clothes. He even ripped his own hair out of his beard, which is, I keep saying that because later Nehemiah will get so mad, he'll rip the hair out of other people's beards. If you guys, I would like some warning if you're that mad. Okay, don't surprise me. And then he began in love. So last week we spent most of our time looking at the remorseful prayer of Ezra. Today, Scripture it's not a coincidence that Scripture shows us this remorseful prayer of Nehemiah. Remorse must play a role. Remorse must play a role in what is happening right now in the life of the Israelite people. Let's read this prayer, and then we'll talk about why remorse must play such a role. Let's read verse 5 through 11. This is his prayer. So he says, Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keeps his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this, your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And we're going to read, for context, I was cupbearer to the king. Okay, stop. All right, so mourning must precede actions again. Why does mourning need to precede actions in these two prayers? Or in our prayers, any prayers? Being sorry for sin. Sure.
2 Corinthians says, godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret. But worldly sorrow brings death.
Oh, what a good verse. Godly sorrow brings repentance. Say that again.
Godly sorrow brings repentance, which leads to salvation and leaves no regret.
Which leads to salvation and leaves no regret. Right? This is a hard place because in our flesh, in our humanness, we would love to skip this part, right? We would love to not have to deal with what we did wrong, but jump to the restoration, right? And then we see this sometimes. We've all received apologies, probably, most notably from children, that they just don't seem like they deal enough with the damage done. They just don't. They're like somebody who's trying to blow past the problem to get to the good part. Well, there is a place in the spiritual life for repentance, for godly sorrow. What did Jesus say? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. There is a real important, essential spot in our faith for lament over the state of the situation and lament over the brokenness of things. And it's easy for Christians and for churches at large to just skip that part. Yeah, we teased last week, if you're kind of catching up with us, if you came in one Sunday and I said, okay, this is a Sunday of lament. That's what we have planned from 10:45 to 12. We are lamenting. Barry's laughing. He knows we won't do it. But why won't I do that? It's biblical. What would I be afraid of? Oh, you can't make it happen? Okay, Barry's on a different plane than me, but he's right. I would be afraid, gosh, what if we have a visitor that day? Right? What about those people that are just barely kind of coming just a little bit anyway, and they come and we have a sad Sunday from 10:45 to 12. They'll never be back again, right? Isn't that what we're afraid of? In the same way that we're afraid of it in our own hearts, looking into the darkness of our failures and our brokenness and our sin, we're afraid of it as a Christian community. We tease that it took the Southern Baptist till the 90s to admit that slavery was wrong. We're not good at this as a people. And even then in the 90s, we fought about it. There were guys in the 90s who didn't want to have to admit that slavery was wrong on the record. We are allergic to accountability. We're allergic to saying what was wrong. And so it's interesting. Before Nehemiah proposes a solution, he gets honest in prayer with God about what was wrong. Now, I liked one guy that I read this week said, he broke it down to two confessions. The first thing he confesses doesn't have to do with himself. What is the first thing he confesses has everything to do with God. I like this as a prayer thought. What does he confess about God at first? How great he is. This is like, and it's such a good thing. It's like you could hear him say, God, I confess that you are great. God, I confess that you are in charge of heaven. I confess that you are awesome. I confess that you keep your promises of love. You keep your commandments. You do everything you say you're going to do. That is a good confession, right? A very good confession. Confession doesn't have to be negative. It's just a statement of what someone knows, right? So after we get through the confession about what he knows about God, he gets to the second confession. I'm calling it 6b. What does he start to confess second? Israelites, including myself and my family. Do what, Crystal? That wasn't Crystal? Even I in my Father's house. He begins to confess the failures of his people. Right? This is what was fascinating about Ezra. Ezra had just arrived in Jerusalem last week when he began to draw solidarity between himself and the ones who had done the failure. He began to confess for them. Nehemiah has never been to Jerusalem. He's never been. 100 years after King Cyrus makes it 170 years since the first exile, since the exile. Nehemiah has no culpability in what put them in exile, does he? So why does he draw solidarity between himself and all these people? What good is there in that? For unity. Strength in numbers, sure. For his people, he connects himself with his people. These are my people. This is who I want to be. I didn't do it personally, but I'm attached to them. And these are the people with which I want to work with you for their redemption, right? Secondly, it's very humbling. It's very grounding. When he confesses the sins for the people, including himself and his father's family, he reminds himself that he is no better, right? He reminds himself that he is just as capable of having sent the nation into exile as the next guy. He reminds himself that I am walking in the bloodline of the people whom God picked but couldn't follow God for 10 minutes, right? He reminds himself of his place in the whole thing. And so he begins to confess in this way. He prays as someone who is committed to what he prays. And he does so, he prays urgently to get God to take action that only God can take. He begins to confess for the people. There is a confession that the people haven't lived up to God's faithfulness. He knows that his people have not been faithful on their side of the relationship, and he echoes Ezra in this prayer. And Nehemiah takes this failure seriously. He uses the word failure 3 times in this section. If we wanted to make it literal, it would read like this: concerning the failings of the Israelites, which we have failed in relation to you, I and my ancestors have failed. This is the basis for his prayer. He decides to, with the first part of his prayer, establish the bedrock of truth. The first confession was about what? God being great, awesome, faithful, upholding his covenant. That is the first foundational thing of truth. The second foundational thing of truth, which is also true, he confesses what? We have failed. We've not been there. And then this is a good place for all of our prayers to start if you're interested in this idea. That start by establishing and by confessing and by getting a bedrock of truth to build the rest of the prayer on. You could even take it so far as to say that a good prayer begins with getting yourself out of denial. God, you are amazing, you are great, you are above me, you know all things, but I have been unfaithful, that I am wishy-washy, that I don't hold my end of the covenant, and that I am in great need of your grace and your guidance. This is a really good foundation to build a communication with God on. All right, and then in 8 to 10, I was trying to figure out how would I summarize 8 to 10. To me, he is revisiting Yahweh's promises. This is another good prayer concept to do. He's not doing anything so far but confessing truths and praying what God has already said in Scripture. Between verses 8 and 10, it's almost like he's reminding God. But in prayer, it is usually us who changes through this meditation, this spiritual examination of God's promises. What promises does he remind himself of in verses 8 through 10? Promise of redemption. Following the promise of scattering, right? You promised you'd scatter us, and you did. But you also promised that you'd bring us back, right? In fact, very pointed, I will gather them from there and bring them from the farthest horizon. I will bring them back to the place I have chosen to leave my name. Verse 10, it's like, they are your servants, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. He's reminding himself in this prayer action what is also true about God. We have the bedrock of who God is, the bedrock of what we've done, and a third foundational element of what God has already said. All that is the beginning of which this prayer is built on, is these confessions. But then we move on to verse 11. It's verse 11 before we get to any sort of request, and which is fascinating because if you were with us last week, you'd hear that Ezra gave no request. Ezra just confessed and left it there. And what was amazing with Ezra, just go ahead and say that, is Ezra left his prayer with this brokenhearted confession, and you would think, gosh, that will make him a really boring leader, a really boring priest, a really boring teacher. But what immediately began to happen before the end of the day is that people gathered around him and joined him in their mourning. And it grew a movement. It was an amazing thing. We would think that if we spent our 10:45 to 12:15-ish time mourning, that people would run from us. But what God did was rise up in his spirit a group of people to come alongside Ezra in his mourning, and it began a movement of holiness. It's a good thing. But in verse 11 today, we're going to see Nehemiah make a request, and I want to pay attention to this request. What's the first thing in this request he wants? Like the God would hear him. Good. God, hear this prayer. Be attentive to the prayer, my prayer and the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. And then there's a specific request that in our place in history reads just a touch ambiguous. What's the specific request? For success, and specifically, favor in the presence of this man. Now we have to think that's why that odd little "I was the cupbearer to the king" lives there. He is asking for a specific request. Lord, here's my heart. Here's what I believe about you. Here's what I know about me and your people. Here's what I believe in your promises, your word. I'm asking, would you give me an opportunity to do something about it? Would you give me an opportunity? Would you open that door for me to have success with this man? And let's go ahead and just call him King Xerxes, Artaxerxes. Sorry, I'm probably going to do that again later. This is a big thing, and this is something that I, in my personal spiritual life, is a earmark. It's that I pray for opportunities to do what is in my heart. I do it a lot. If I need to talk to somebody, if there's something that would work better if we just tweaked it a little bit, I will say, God, will you arrange the right moment and the right situation where we can begin to make progress on this? Will you help me to run into this person when they have time to talk? Will you grant an opportunity for us to visit what it is you have for us? I know the reasons that I do that, but if you were to do that, what reasons what benefits does that cause you, bring you? Why is that a good spiritual practice for us at times? Great. When it happens, we know God heard our prayer. We know that He is the one creating the action and not me, right? And yeah. What else? What other benefits? Gives us a closer relationship, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are lots of things there. A dependence on God. I'm going to wait on Him. And then you said this key word, timing, right? What can you trust about timing in a situation like this? He has the right moment, right? Accountability. Oh, sure. Good aspect, Barry. What do you mean by that?
Well, when I pray to God, I'm now not just
creator of all the universe that this needs to be done.
Very good. Very good aspect. Humility. I'm going to cast this situation, which is causing me some level of concern or anxiety or stress, at your feet. And I know that you have the right moment. You have the right situation. You may need to continue to prepare my heart. You may need to continue to prepare their heart. You know what's best. There's a temptation, not a temptation I have. I like to wait. I don't know if you've ever been impacted by that. I apologize. But I like to wait until, don't not too enthusiastically. Until I feel confident, until I know what I want to see there. I don't know why. But there are times when we are tempted, particularly other people, not me, of just rip up the phone and just get it done. Just do it now, right? And sometimes I do. I just do it now. But really, my flesh temptation is just to wait and see. Well, sometimes I'm waiting just as an avoidance technique. I'm not always a holy waiter, but there is such a thing as holy waiting, where we say, God, I'm going to give you this situation. I trust you with it, and when you open that door, I promise I will walk through it. I covenant with you to walk through it. And when I pray that, and I am patient, it won't be too terribly long usually that the door opens and God gives me the courage and the strength I need to walk into it, and it resolves so much better than I ever thought. So, that is the first prayer of Nehemiah here. And I want you to notice, this is in November, December. There's a reason I pointed that out. And he prayed specifically that he would have success with the king. Let's talk about what he does for the king. What is it? How does he describe his job? Cupbearer. All right, let me read this. This is from a big commentary. Nehemiah lived in Susa as an important member of the king's staff. As a cupbearer or a butler, he would be in charge of the wine cellar. He would also have had the responsibility of tasting the king's wine to make sure it wasn't poisoned. The office could mean that he was as close to the king as a companion or a confidant at times in history. And the way the events unfold indicates that he was indeed as in a position of closeness to the king and ready to make use of his status. And so that day, after the mourning, after the confessing, after the brokenheartedness, he began to pray for an opportunity to find favor with this man, the king. And he waited. If you'll look, just look with your eyes at verse 1 in chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. It's both the 20th year, but Nisan corresponds to March, April. Okay? So somewhere in the end of November, early December, he began to pray, God, I'm brokenhearted over the situation. Please open a door for me to be able to do something about it. And at some point in late March, early April, God opens that door with the king, the most powerful man in the free world at the time. Let's read. We're going to read all the way through verse 10. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its great gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven. And I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take? And when will you be back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy." And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officials and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that anyone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. And that's where we'll stop reading for today. Okay, March, April. Let's just say, let's do the minimum. Let's say we went all of December, January, February, and we're at the end of March somewhere. 4 months later, after praying, "God, please give me an opportunity. Please give me favor with this man, the king." One day, it comes. He's bringing him the wine. Anybody want to be a poison wine taster? Yeah, what an interesting job. But they had more responsibilities. It was more like they named it after the responsibility that the king saw the most. Butler is a pretty good word here. Of which one of the responsibilities was the wine. He knows he has this thing in his heart. Let's just stop right here. Let's pretend we're right here. What is going on with Nehemiah? How would we describe his emotional, psychological, spiritual state? How does he feel? What do you imagine? He's sad, he's downtrodden. What does he want? He wants to go home. He wants help. But what are the realities in which he's contending with? Joe says it ain't going to happen.
His people are in exile, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
His face is so downtrodden that, it's almost like depression.
Yeah.
If the king noticed it.
Yeah. She said it's almost like depression because his face is so downtrodden. Part of the hard realities is, I don't think he applied for this job with the king online and he can put out his resumes other places. It just wasn't that kind of a free society. He kind of knows he can't very well just leave. He's going to need some help. He's going to need some favor. He's going to need a little bit of divine intervention to be able to get this, right? So, yeah. He has an important job to be doing there.
If he doesn't get that divine intervention, he doesn't have faith.
Mm.
And he might as well die.
Yeah, that's right. If he does not get divine intervention, he's not going to get favor with the king. And then Rocky said he might as well die. He's going to feel like that if he doesn't get it.
He says he was afraid.
He was very afraid. He's very afraid. I read one commentary, and I don't know how you could prove this, but it was that you were not allowed to be in the presence of the king if you in a bad mood. I could imagine if I was the most powerful man in the circle, I would want everybody around me to maintain a positive attitude. I think that would be an expectation that I might develop. But anyway, that was kind of one of his things. And so he comes in, knowing he can't quite quit his job, knowing very badly he wants to go to Jerusalem, praying for the help of Jerusalem. He also knows that as the butler, he is asking for something way beyond his pay grade. You could say he's asking for some role reversal. Instead of the king asking him to do it and he does whatever the king asks, he wants the king to do what he asks. And the granting of this request will be seen as something of a miracle. And so he comes in, his face, he says, I had not been sad in his presence before. It's an earmarker of Nehemiah saying there was something about this day that had taken me to a lower point than I had had in the previous 4 months, right? He is all of a sudden hit a moment of incontainable sadness or depression or however you want to think of it. And so for the first time, he cannot control his face, and he ends up in front of the king, and the king looks up at him, and this is the moment of fear, and the king asks him a real question. How did you read the king's question? What tones do you see there? Compassion. Good. I see a lot of that. Honest curiosity. If there is someone who tastes my drink for poison, I want to be their friend. I just think it's the least I could do. Right? That may not even be a good plan, because if they keel over, I'm going to feel bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Barry, you are clever today. Why do you look so sad? Is it because the wine is bad? Good deal, man. Yep.
Also might speak of Nehemiah and his, I mean, you said it was maybe illegal to be sad in the king's presence, but if Nehemiah had been like a constant, kind, generous person, maybe in the king's presence before, then maybe this case would have really stood out. I don't know.
Yeah. Sure.
Conjecture, but it just makes me think that maybe it speaks well of who Nehemiah was.
Sure.
I mean, the king too cared about him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that value to him, he cared
Yeah.
instead of Saul.
Yeah, man. The compassion continues, because what we have, I tried to read it in a way that emphasized that, is we have a little bit of an emotional chess game. We have greater risk, and then greater risk, and then greater risk, ultimately showing the depth of this work. Now, he becomes afraid when the king looks at him and says, "Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." And Jeremiah's immediate reaction, he said, "I was afraid, but I went forward anyway." Right? I mean, I think if Nehemiah had said, "Oh, no, I'm fine, I'm sorry," or "my dog got run over," or something like that, he could have made the whole thing go away. The fear is not what's happened so far. The fear is about what's about to come out of his mouth, right? Why should he be afraid of what's about to come out of his mouth?
Is this the king that stopped the work on the temple?
Yeah, no, maybe. I plead the fifth. I didn't do my homework that way. I think it might be. I'm just afraid to go on the record for it, but
So that was part of why he was scared then.
he could be. He could be. Good thought, Alicia. I'm gonna back out of this question until I can do my homework better. I've been confused, frankly, about these kings. I got caught not knowing there was 2 Dariuses a couple weeks ago, and I got told about it at dinner after Sunday night.
I had said that was a possibility, that maybe there were 2 Dariuses, and you kind of shot me down.
Yeah, I
And
did.
you figured it out, and then you didn't even say that I had that.
And that was wrong of me. We all know that. My cupbearer. Whoa. Okay. So,
Nehemiah, he's weighing the risk between this building project is very important to me. If it gets rejected by the king, it could be very negative consequences.
it could. Absolutely. Yeah. Good point. I didn't think about all this. Good point, guys. Yeah. So the interesting thing is, let me modernize this just a touch. I'm not going to change it too much. But in that moment of He's been praying for an opportunity to speak to the king about this, right? He's been praying for favor with the king. And in that moment, the king asks him a question, why do you look that way? You could just feel his heart go up into his throat, right? This is the fear. This is the moment. But I've been praying for this. And he steps into, and this is where I'm going to make it probably a little bit too modern. He is given a choice between telling the truth or skirting the issue, right? This should feel common to all of us, right? Because even I think inside of a marriage, sometimes you even though you live together, you might have an opportunity to say, I have this look on my face because I still don't have clean underwear, right? Or you can skirt the issue and say, I'm fine, I just tired, right? He's given this choice, he's looked for this opportunity, he's prayed for this opportunity, and he's stepping in with the authentic state of his heart. And that's brave. That's brave, especially the most powerful man in the world. Here's why I'm sad, right? And so he's afraid, and he begins to speak, and he hits something. And let's be frank, what he says could be considered a criticism, right? This is a land that is under control of King Artaxerxes. It could be considered a criticism of what he's going to do. But he steps into that God-brought moment with authenticity. He comes straight out for the reason for his dejected look. And in his phrasing in terms of Jerusalem being the city where his ancestors were buried, that's very wise and very ancient. It would appeal to the king in the cultural context of where one's family burial place would be deserving of respect. And then you could almost just hear the breath held within Nehemiah's chest. What simple question does the king respond with? Yeah. What'd you say, Crystal? What are you requesting? Oh, yeah. She has a modern-y thing. The NIV read, what is it you want?
That's open easy.
It is. What is it in your heart? What's going on? What do you need?
Like a blank check.
What, Chuck? Oh. Yeah. I mean, he just had to breathe a sigh of relief. But listen to this. The pressure has not gone out. The situation is not done. In fact, it's still building. Nehemiah is still building courage. Artaxerxes says, what is it you want? He's indicated, I'm willing to listen. And then, look at this. This is the second prayer of Nehemiah. Second half of verse 4. What is this? This little prayer. You ever do the little prayers? Right? That's why I call this the two prayers of Nehemiah. The first one was mourning and asking for an opportunity. The second one is a little prayer. I was reading a professor from Fuller when I was preparing this, and he made this whole section about what he calls arrow prayers, little bitty prayer situation. And this one isn't as grandiose, but it's very significant. In the moment of fear, Nehemiah took a moment and said, Lord, help me. I'm about to tell the most powerful man in the free world exactly what I want. Well, what do you think? If you were phrasing this prayer, what would you pray in your little heart? I mean, I don't know that it's little, but what would you pray in your heart? Wisdom and favor. Help. Help me have the words. Sometimes that's a good prayer. Please wake me up. Yeah, I got you. All right. And so he prays again in that moment. And it's cool. Nehemiah writes this in his own voice. This isn't one of those history books where someone's writing later. This is Nehemiah writing in my own voice. In that moment, I sat there, I said, Yahweh, help me in some form. And I answered the king. And what he answers the king with is bold and it's true. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, if you like the idea and you trust me, send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. I mean, that's a big ask, right? I mean, remember, he is a butler. probably a slave in some capacity. He is asking to become a what? A governor, a general contractor in charge of a big project, right? However you put it, he's asking big. I mean, it's a good thing he prayed first, huh? And so he gives this big ask, send me back, let me out of my job here that you rely on me to do, send me to do something I'm not qualified to do, give me a position of authority, give me resources and all this stuff so that I can rebuild it. And then in verse 6, we're supposed to read the way that it's written, a little bit of hesitancy, a little bit of pause. Because look at this, it doesn't say the king said, it gives us details. It makes the reader simmer a second. Then the king gives us a detail that doesn't quite matter, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long is it going to take? And when will you get back? Right? The king is engaged. He's working on the details, huh? Interesting. What do you read in this? What does this tell us about Artaxerxes and Nehemiah? He trusts him.
It must come across that it's favorable because he says it pleased the king to send you.
Yeah?
That response didn't seem like, well, you really belong here. I don't know if I should send you.
Yeah.
It comes across as, I'm going to send you. I just want to know when you're coming back.
Yeah, man. He wants him back is a very simple subtext to that statement. We're supposed to be reading miraculousness all over this, right? He prayed for this opportunity. The opportunity came. He prayed for the strength. He stepped up to the plate. He swung the bat really big, and we're just waiting to see how far the ball goes. And then when the king strokes his chin and says, how long will it take you, and when you coming back? Whew. This is big. This is miraculous, more compassion. When he responds positively, here we go. The king keeps considering. When you coming back? Let's see, where are we at? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. Nehemiah also knows, let's be frank about this. This tells us something about Nehemiah. He's not looking to relocate and become a governor for the rest of his life. He plans on coming back. He is doing this genuinely out of a sense of advancing the kingdom and altruism. He wants the Jerusalem to be better and to be rebuilt, and then I'll come back and do what I'm supposed to do, but this is important enough to me to do it. And then he gets to asking for some more. I mean, this is cool. Apparently he's feeling more confident. I also said to him, not only just send me, but what am I going to need, right? He asked, can you send me some letters to the governors between now and then so that they can make sure that I'm safe while I travel? And can you also give me a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, for the temple and for the city wall and for my private residence? I mean, he's found his confidence all of a sudden. And it's pretty neat about that. Nehemiah also needs to be able to establish his authorization to do the work when he gets there. The people who are responsible for overseeing the province, he needs this. The wisdom of that request soon emerges as we get this reference to Sanballat and Tobiah here in a minute. The wood thing is interesting. You could tell he's been a part of court affairs because he knows the name of the man in Judah who's responsible for the royal forest. Okay, so he knows what to ask for. And in 8b, and because the gracious hand of God was on me, the king granted my requests. Simply, because the hand of the Lord was upon me, the most powerful man in the world granted my requests. Yeah, he does. We see this thing in 10 as foreshadowing. We see a lot of foreshadowing when we get into the later history books, where we're meeting characters so that we recognize them when they turn up as villains here in a minute. But circling back to the point of the passage, I think it's significant to notice the two different kinds of prayers of Nehemiah and the faith of Nehemiah and the way that he prayed and then he waited, and then God opened a door and he walked through it. And the way that in the middle of the tensest moment of his life, he prayed and he continued in courage to do what God had put in his heart to do. It's a cool story, right? Any comments, questions, or rebuttals?
You know, when you were talking about the prayer where he had the two elements. One, he said, God, how big you are.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, God, we fail.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same pattern that Jesus followed when he taught his disciples to pray.
Mm-hmm.
Hallowed be thy name, and Lord, we fail. We sin. Forgive us our sins.
Yeah, it really is. It's powerful. You know, when I was younger, somebody, I don't remember where it was, probably multiple times they taught us this, a pattern of prayer, which, you know, I think it was acts: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. It is not off that pattern. It is not off the pattern of the Lord's Prayer. It is a really good idea to start your prayers telling how great God is, and then admitting your own humility before we move into, you know, gimme. Yeah. I even like the addition of the Thanksgiving in the middle there. I think that's very healthy to me. Cool.
A lot of the Psalms follow the same pattern.
They do. It is a good pattern. Anything else? Oh, 7:05. Barry, let's sing out of here. Well, you have an upbeat song I saw on the thing. Did y'all switch the camera to where I was?
Let's sing together, What a Mighty God We Serve. What a mighty